Hello and good day. This is Buddy Crescione. Today I'll be going through the 9100 revision changes. Uh, Hopefully many of you had an opportunity to participate in my key changes presentation that I did for Perry Johnson last month. And this is the more detailed clause by clause discussion. So a little bit about myself. I am currently the chair of the AAQSC, the America's Aerospace Quality Systems Committee, and the leader for the America's requirements as well as 9100 standard. So I oversee all the standards that IAQG publishes here in the Americas, in addition to the 9100 standard, which of course is what this topic is today. So also I will tell everybody that you're in listen-only mode. What I'm going to strive to do today is if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box. And I think we have a little bit more time than we did during the 1-hour key changes presentation, and I'll be able to answer any questions as we're going along. So the 9100 series of standards were published back in September. 9100, 9110, 9120, as well as 9101. Obviously, these standards are all based upon the ISO 9001, which was published in September 2015. I've mentioned a couple times the key changes presentation. It's kind of a more high-level overview of the changes and talks about kind of some of the key threads that talk specifically with regards to some of the new concepts of the standard. Is really the intent of the key changes presentation. I know that Perry Johnson has that on their website and is available for you to review. If you should so choose to go do that, I would encourage you to go do it. Even though you can still participate in this particular session and probably get just as much out of it. Just to remind everybody, first of all, no gripe at all against ISO 9001, excellent quality management system standard, 1.2, 1.4 million companies worldwide certified to the standard. But what aviation, space, and defense wanted to do was to develop some common requirements so we didn't have so many customer or company unique requirements coming to the supply chain. So that was the whole intent of the whole International Aerospace Quality Group, the IAQG, and the development of this, the first of the standards, 9100. So why did ISO 9001 need to change? Well, as you can remember from some of our earlier discussions, if you're in earlier sessions, it really hasn't changed for 15 years. It is part of the ISO process every 8 years, actually every 5 years. It takes another couple then for the writing to take place, but every 5 years they look at all their standards to say, hey, what do we need to do? Do we need to update it, revise it, cancel it? So the last revision was for ISO was in 2008. Before that, year 2000. Typically what they do, big change, small change, so this is intended for a big change. The 2015, it sets a whole new structure, which hopefully will be consistent for the next 15 years and reflects the needs of all the different interested parties. In the past, the standard was a little bit weak, especially when it came to dealing with the service industry. Services were always included as part of a product or as part of the product definition, but unfortunately a lot of the standard requirements really were not geared towards service industry. And also now that we have this common management system structure, hopefully we'll see the companies also embracing other ISO management system standards now that it'll be easier to go integrate. So 9100, obviously ISO changes we needed to change. We also wanted to incorporate feedback from our web survey performed back in 2013, as well as to look at the clarifications that we've been receiving to see if there's better ways to word the requirements. We want to always make sure that the standards are as clear as possible. Sometimes, though, we want to make sure that we don't try to clarify it for this one group and then confuse other people with regard to the requirements. So that's some of the reasons for the change. So let's get into the meat of the presentation. So as I go through this, we'll be stepping through each of the different clauses of the standard, and where there's a change, we'll be talking about, will be highlighted off to the right, and will either be a yellow box or a beige box if it's an ISO 9001 2015 change. If it's a 9100 driven change from the aviation, space, and defense, it'll be the pale blue. But obviously, at the end of the day, they're all 9100 changes since ISO is incorporated, but we just wanted to kind of provide an indicator of what the source of the change was. Also, whenever there's a little I with a circle around it, that means there's additional slides. So here's some of the topics we'll be having some additional discussion on, so just for your information. So to start off with, the standard starts with a forward, revision summary, rationale, and tenant application, and then goes right into an introduction. 0.1 is the general. Real happy to say that ISO is included with the terminology shall, should, may, and can means. In the past, they've not done that. So now we have a little bit better understanding about what these words mean. I have gotten the question here in the Americas about the word must. Must is used, I think, in the introduction of the standard, and that's it. I know the FAA is starting to use the word must instead of the word shall, but at this point, ISO standards still use the terminology shall. 0.2, quality management principles. As you remember, the principles were first introduced back in the year 2000. What's interesting is that even though they're the foundation that ISO 9001 was based on, they did not show up in ISO 9001. You have to go look at ISO 9000 or 9004. Pleased to say that those principles now exist within the standard here in 0.2. 0.3, the process approach. The process approach has always been key to the standard, especially for the scalability of the standard. What's interesting is that the process approach has actually even been more emphasized with this latest version of ISO 9001. One of the reasons I believe is because of the strengthening of some of the sector documents like aerospace. What we've done is we've required things like pairs and so forth, which really has driven home the processes. ISO has kind of followed suit with embellishing the process approach. They have schematic representations of what's a process, how that works with the PDCA, life cycle, risk-based thinking, and so forth. 0.4, relationship with other management system standards. Excellent little table in the back annex that shows other ISO standards, and there's a little table that shows the relationship of those ISO standards, the different clauses of the standards, so you can actually see, you know, hey, where do these particular other ISO standards and now, of course, 9100 standards as well, or IAQG standards, how do those reflect activities within the 9100 standard? Getting into the requirements, starts with section 1, scope. What's the scope of the quality management system? Normative references, terms and definitions. See there we still have special requirements, critical items, key characteristics defined. Added two new definitions, counterfeit parts and product safety. Context of the organization. The context of the organization is defining your organization's quality management system standard. And it starts off by saying, what is your organization? What's its context that it operates under? And it uses this term, what are the external and internal issues? So external issues would be things that are coming to your quality management system from the outside. Legal requirements, what are the technological advances, what are the competitive forces out there, the market, the culture, societal, economic environment that you're operating under. And the internal issues, what are the internal issues with regards to your internal culture, values, knowledge, how you perform. These are all aspects of being defined within 4.1 of your quality management system. Many times companies kind of look at this as kind of like their organizational SWOT analysis, or what you do when you're developing your organization strategy. So very much right in line with that. Recognize this information could be sensitive, but also would encourage you to recognize that there's proprietary information agreements in place, and we want to make sure that you've kind of taken a look at really understanding how you're operating as an organization. .2, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Interested parties has replaced the term customers, partners, and so forth, stakeholders. There's an additional slide on this within the standard. So it's important to take kind of a holistic view of interested parties instead of just kind of looking at it as just being, who are my customers and making sure that they stay happy. Not to say that that's not important, but still, interested parties is a broader term. 4.3, determining the scope of the quality management system. Right? In the past, we've always required what's your scope, what's your boundaries of your system, including what are cases where you're going to have any exclusions. In the past, we always used the negative, the exclusions. Now we're using kind of more of the positive, what's applicable within your organization. So we want to make sure that the scope is appropriate. If there's an aspect of the standard that you're required to do, even if you outsource it, you cannot exclude it. So as an example, if you outsource special processing, that's fine, but you cannot exclude that because you still perform that as part of your quality management system. You just choose to have it be done by somebody else. Many times I get the question about, so what is this going to look like, buddy? Are we going to need to list every single clause that's applicable? If it was me, I'd probably put some words down like, all the clauses are applicable excluding these, okay? Just makes things a little bit more tidy. 4.4, quality management system and its processes. This is where you're defining the processes necessary for my quality management system. They're required to be documented to the extent necessary, right, depending upon the complexity, the knowledge of your workforce, what's the product that you have. This is where we have added a requirement within 9100. There's a lot of good information that should be retained or maintained within the Section 4. In the past, these things were required in the quality manual, things like what's the scope of your system, what's your interaction of processes, and so forth. We've even added to that for adding things like interested parties and require that to be documented information. And it can be called a quality manual if you want, even though that term has been, from an ISO perspective, has been removed, but we added the requirement for the retention or the gathering of these information. Retention is not the right word. The gathering of this information to be part of the overall set of documents. And it should be documented at the top of the structure. One of the problems people have always had with the term quality manual is typically manuals are very low-level how-to type documents, and the type of information we're talking about is very top-level type documents. So let's talk a little bit more about interested parties. You see the definition there from ISO 9000. Stakeholder, person or organization that can affect or be affected or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. Examples, employees, management, organizational owners, unions, suppliers, customers, partners, regulatory authorities, certification organizations, etc., etc. Okay? So it's a much broader concept than just stakeholder. They can even be kind of grouped into different types of groupings, which is fine. Let me see if before I leave interested parties, one thing is defining your interested parties and then defining who of those are relevant. For example, you may have a certain interested party that may not be relevant to every aspect of your quality management system. For example, as part of design input, it's required for you to consider interested parties' inputs. Well, obviously you're not going to go to employees for what their input is to design input, but you definitely would want to go to your customers or consider regulatory information with regards to design inputs. So there's a kind of a multiple aspect of this. One is defining your interested parties and then defining who of those are relevant in what aspects of your quality management system. The scope. Okay, the scope depends upon what your activities. As I said, it no longer talks the negative exclusions, but what's applicable. It applies to the size, the complexity, your structure, your activities, the nature of the risk and opportunities that you have within your organization. So, but if it was me, once again, I would not necessarily include a list of everything, but I would definitely try to make sure that I provided the words, here's what's applicable, and then here's what's not applicable, and including the justification for that. Once again, you need to make sure that any non-applicabilities is justified. What ISO has done is in the past they restricted exclusions to Section 7. There is no such restrictions in the new standards, not in ISO 9001, not in 9100. But for aviation, space, and defense, that's what AS&D stands for, we would expect the non-applicability outside of Section 8, which is operations or product realization, product life cycle, to be very unusual. The quality manual, as I said, ISO chose to remove it. We had this additional topic in there saying, go collect this type of information on interested parties, your scope, your process description, sequence and interactions, responsibilities and authorities. There's lots of different ways to go do that. That was the thing that excited me the most about some of the things that ISO 9001 has done, is before where you had to have set documented procedures for everything. Now you can be more creative. You know, you can have signage, you can have posters, you can have websites. You know, there's different ways to go get the same message through. You can have embedded videos, for all, you know, for goodness sake. So the intent is to make sure that you have your system defined, such when somebody says, help me understand your system, you have a consistent way to be able to go show that it is documented and understood. So that's section 4. The next section is section 5, leadership. As you remember, the current 2009 version talked to management responsibilities. You're already seeing a focus on you know, applying this at a higher level. So once again, you have to have top leadership's engagement. I think Aviation, Space, and Defense has done a great job with requiring an interview with the top management of the company, at least on an annual basis. Makes a lot of sense to show their engagement within the system. Also the fact that now there's, you know, is always expected before, but now there's actually a requirement that your quality management system is integrated into your business processes. You want to ensure consistency between how you operate as a company and your quality management system. Matter of fact, many companies call their quality management system business management systems or company management systems, just to kind of integrate with the fact of here's how we run the business. In 5.2, the policy, there's now explicit requirements that the policy be aligned with the strategic direction of the organization. So, you know, I always make the comment that the policy is kind of like a North Star, kind of a focus on where you're trying to go shoot for. Now it's even more so. Kind of almost used the term before as like a mission statement. Well, guess what? Now it's even more so. Organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Probably the most significant thing here is ISO has taken out the requirement for a management representative. Their thought is that let's keep those same responsibilities, add to them, and put everything on top management. Well, instead of having top management be able to delegate it down to somebody in the quality organization, where the 9100 and IAQG teams agree with the thinking that ISO has. The problem is that then top management can then delegate that responsibility to multiple people. Now all of a sudden I don't have a single point of responsibility and authority for my quality management system. So what 9100 did is we put the requirement for a management representative back into the standard. All right. Section 6, planning. This is where we first start talking about risk and opportunities, the whole risk-based thinking that kind of permeates the new standard, where it talks about how do we look at risk and opportunities throughout the whole quality management system. I'll point to you first that, you know, the risk and opportunities is in the planning section. So as you're doing your planning for your whole quality management system, how do you consider what are the different risks and how do those risks then permeate your whole system? Now, this does not require a risk management activity like we do in Section 8 now of the standard 811. As we introduced risk management in 2009, but it does need people to be able to articulate, here's how we're considering risk throughout my quality management system. Quality objectives and planning to achieve them. What's interesting is much more detail with regards to how to go do quality objectives. In the past, I think there was just basically a requirement, go get quality objectives. Now there's actually more requirements associated with that, where we're talking about how to make sure of that we have the identified person, resources, timelines, what are the success criteria, and so forth. Some of the other management system standards, like ISO 14001, already required some of these additional beefing up of objectives. In ISO 14001, they're called programs. So what you'll see is more emphasis on objectives and documentation on how to go achieve them. So I would encourage you to go take a look at that so it doesn't surprise you. Planning of changes. ISO benchmarks itself against excellence models as well. They realized that they're a little bit weak when it came to planning of changes, so they added some additional text. They added a clause on planning of changes in a couple different spots to make sure that the quality management system stays, the integrity is being maintained as changes occur, and as changes occur, they're properly planned. Okay. Moving on to Section 7. Section 7 is support. And after the end of this section, what we'll do is we'll check to see what questions we have so far. So if you have any questions on clauses 1 through 7, please ask me, and we'll take a break and address those questions before we go on to Section 8. So 7.1 is resources, includes all different kinds of resources, including people, human resources, the infrastructure, how are we, the processes we need to ensure the support of our system, and then 7.1.4, environment for the operation of processes. Before we used to call that work environment. It includes these things about human and physiological factors. Let's really look at the intent. I know a lot of people are getting excited by some of the examples that are being stated, but when it comes down to it, what's important is that we have an environment that's conducive to people wanting to come to work, that's conducive to people having quality products and services that they can provide repetitively to our customers. 7.1.5, monitoring and measuring resources, that's the calibration. So fortunately, there was realization that maybe that did not belong in the product life cycle in Section 7, like we have it right now in 2009 and 7.6. Maybe that should better be in a support process. So there it is, 7.1.5. Organizational knowledge. We'll talk some more about this in the next slide. But how do we capture knowledge within our organization? 7.2, competence. What's interesting is every time the standard comes out, it seems to have less and less references to the word quality and to the word training. More emphasis on the competence of personnel instead of training. So this is no different. 7.3, awareness. The awareness includes things like awareness to the quality policy, awareness to the organization's objectives. Now there's some additional 9100 requirements about aware of how you contribute to product or service conformity, the contribution to product safety, the importance of ethical behavior. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide as well. 7.4, communication. In the past, quality management systems have focused primarily on or solely on internal communications. But some of the other standards like ISO 14000 had both an internal and external communication consideration. So the standard has now been expanded to include external communications. So to go look at how do you communicate, how often do you communicate, what do you communicate, and so forth. 7.5, documented information. So we no longer have control of documents, control of records that have now been merged into documented information. It's a new terminology where we're talking about maintained documented information. You're talking about procedures, right? 'Cause you're maintaining the documented information. If you're retaining the documented information, you're talking about records. Also, there's no longer a requirement for the 6 mandated procedures that are required. I will tell you that you know, I saw very few companies ever that just had 6 mandated procedures and that was it. Many companies have procedures that are necessary for the consistent operating of the business, especially with the organizational knowledge requirement now coming out. That you know, that's one way to retain organizational knowledge. So, but aviation, space, and defense did maintain the requirement for a non-conforming material and corrective action procedures. 753, control of documented information. One of the things that 9120 had was some good information with regards to how to go, how to make sure that your records and your systems are backed up and protected. Well, we took that and then moved to the next step as well with regard to data protection processes for the IT activities, with cybersecurity being so critical today. It's important to make sure that this information is appropriately managed. A little bit more about organizational knowledge. It's how do we make sure we capture the knowledge that's gained by experience that's within our organizations. We want to make sure that as individuals leave the organization, there's not a loss of knowledge, that knowledge is captured so others can go continue to perform the activities. You know, what's important is that we find, you know, how do we go acquire the knowledge necessary for the organization and then make sure that's appropriately shared. One way to go do this is through lessons learned databases. One of the concerns I would have is that I've seen this done very well, especially in the software arena, but also I've seen this done very poorly where lots of time and effort was spent capturing lessons learned in the database and then nobody going and accessing this information. So if you're going to go develop it, please use it. The standard does not require a lessons learned database. That's just one option and one example that's provided. Okay. It talks about experts. Obviously, you want to capture lessons learned from your experts, not from somebody who's not one of your best employees. Succession planning, very consistent with what organizational knowledge is trying to get at. Awareness, talked already about the new awareness clause and the, you know, the being able to go to the employee and say, so talk to me about how you contribute to product or service conformity or product safety. And what you would expect to hear is an internalizing of the requirements of that employee, that, you know, if I don't build it right, You know, there could be a product safety impact. There could be a product conformity impact. We won't have a satisfied customer. We'll get return products, those types of things. This is, once again, awareness to the employees coming down from leadership on expectations. It can be direct communication down the chain of command. It can be communication campaigns on topics. It could be using different focal points for responsibility for communication, formalized training. What you want, once again, people not to be able to read something off, but how to really to go internalize this. The ethical behavior aspect, does this mean I have to go set up an ethics hotline? Not necessarily. It depends on your organization. Your organization needs to determine where you at with regards to ethical behavior, and if an employee has an issue, how would they go raise that issue? Some companies use, chain of command, and that there's an issue in the chain of command, there's an alternative resources, an ombudsman, an HR, some other way to be able to go get the information out. But bottom line is you want to have a culture within your organization where employees understand their responsibilities and then feel that management is listening when they bring up concerns and taking action to go address their particular problem. You want to have an environment where people are reporting, identifying, raising their hands when there's an issue, and not just passing on defects or issues down the line. If these things are not kept in check, there could be damaging customer considerations, criminal activities, breakage of laws. So once again, ethical behavior being critically important. As I mentioned, the standard no longer requires 6 mandatory documented procedures. The level of documentation depends a lot upon your business context within your system with regards to how you want to go maintain your system and make sure you have an adequate amount of documentation to have consistent, repetitive processes. All right, let's see. Before I talked some about procedure, the maintained documented documentation. Let me also spend a minute talking about retained documented information. It's important that you retain documented information to show evidence of compliance to the standard as well as your internal procedures. So I know before people were like, oh, I just need to go maintain it wherever it says C424. Nope, that was always just a minimum. All right, so let's go ahead and take a break and take a look at see what questions we have, and I'm not seeing any questions. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and write them in, and we will respond to those as we receive them. Okay. Section 8. Before we used to call this section product realization. Now we call it operation, which seems to make a lot more sense. Is how we operate the company. So, of course, it's kind of interesting. As some of us, it took us years to kind of get comfortable with the term product realization. Now we even start using it in our language, and it changes to operation. But anyway, such is progress. It starts off, and I think it will look very similar to what you've seen in the past. It starts off with operational planning and control. What you'll not see in this subset is a title called Project Management or Control of Work Transfers. Those requirements have not gone away. They are embedded within 8.1. But what we found is that the title Project Management was confusing to some. So we chose to go ahead and remove that particular title, even though the content of performing work within resource and schedule constraints and appropriate budgets were very good to have within the standard itself. Okay. Also, you'll see in 8.1 is emphasis on planning, more planning and control activity. Ensuring engagement from representatives from all functions within the organization. You'll also see this term called integrated phase processes. What does that mean? And it's really just talking about looking at all phases of the product life cycle to ensure that they're adequately planned and organized. And it also kind of links back those of you who are APQP, PPAP type experts will say, hey, I recognize that term. That is certainly a way to go do this operational planning and control. The automotive industry has shown that can be extremely effective. AS9100D APQP PPAP was recently released, but it is not a requirement to be compliant with that standard to be compliant with 9100. Operational risk management is pretty much unchanged from what the risk management requirements are today. Once again, this is where we're expecting risk management overall for the product and services that you provide. So once again, 6.1 is where you're dealing with quality management system risk, 811 product risk during the operational phase. 812, what we did is we moved the configuration management requirement to 7.1 last revision, and we wanted to add some additional details to explain what configuration management looks like. So what we did is we used some of the requirements around ISO 10007. The problem with that is that a lot of the terms like configuration status accounting, lots of mom and pop shops are like, what in the heck does that mean to my business? So what we did is we went ahead and tried to put it in easier to understand language that could be applicable to all of our stakeholders. So I think you'll enjoy that when you see that new requirement or the clarifications. Product safety. Product safety has always been critical to our industry, and so what we've done is we've added it into the standard. This is also very much in keeping with some of the initiatives from the civil aviation side with the KO and safety management systems. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple charts. Also, prevention of counterfeit parts. Very much a big concern by many of our stakeholders. Many of our parts, many of our aircraft have flown around for 40, 50 plus years, especially on the military side. So how do we make sure that we still have parts to go maintain these particular aircraft. How do we make sure that we have controls in place to prevent the use of counterfeit or suspect counterfeit type parts? So once again, risk management. What's interesting is that in 2009, we spent a lot of time discussing about whether risk management should be within, should we have it applied to the whole quality management system or just to, product realization. And we decided, okay, we'll do for 2009 release was just have it apply to Section 7, and then the next revision will expand it. Well, guess what? ISO did that for us. So once again, Clause 6.1 talks about the risk associated with the QMS, overall QMS risk. 811 talking specifically about operational processes, your product realization, your product type risk. Annex A4 does a very nice job in kind of giving some additional details. Once again, annexes are just guidance material, not audited, and talks about some of the differences, and we added some clarity there about 9100 to try to separate out what's the ISO requirements versus the 9100 requirements. Product safety, Clause 813, separate clause, but also you see there that there's several other clauses that reference product safety. If you think about it, product safety was really first introduced last revision, 2009, with the whole concept of critical items. Those were items that, if they failed, would have a catastrophic impact on the product. Well, that's product safety, all right. I mentioned Safety Management System, the KO, International Civil Aviation Authority. It's not meant to meet the requirements of a KO and SMS, but give everybody a little bit of a taste for this safety management system. It is worded such that I believe all organizations will be able to understand how to go implement it within their systems, within their organizations. The definition of product safety, the state in which a product is able to perform its designated or intended purpose without causing unacceptable risk of harm to persons or damage to property. Here are just some examples. Once again, not requirements to go audit to, but examples of ways you can go make the assessment by doing things like FMEAs, safety analysis, identify and mitigate risk, and once again, managing those critical items that we introduced back in 2009. Analysis and reporting of occurred events. Once you identify something that could be an issue, how do you go analyze and report it, and then communicate these events and train your personnel such they don't recur again. We want to learn from them. We want to promote a safety culture, and we want others to learn from us as well. Counterfeit parts, a new clause, also referenced in a couple of different areas to really mitigate the growing effect of counterfeit, fraudulent type parts within our system. It's defined as an unauthorized copy, imitation, substitute, or modified part which knowingly misrepresented as a genuine specified part of an original or authorized manufacturer. Here's some things to consider from counterfeit parts. First is training. Training your personnel on the understanding of what is counterfeit parts, what's the risk, how do we fall suspect to counterfeit parts, especially the procurement personnel. Procurement personnel are usually rewarded for getting that low cost. Well, sometimes the cost is too good to be true for a reason. Your inspection personnel, where are we at highest risk for counterfeit parts, and if everything doesn't quite look right, to make sure that they raise their hands as they're doing their inspections and tests. Design personnel, to consider obsolescence in the design process. Obsolescence monitoring is actually, and requirements are even now part of the input requirements for design and development. Controls for acquiring parts, making sure we're getting parts from original manufacturers, authorized distributors, or approved sources, and not just from some internet sale that we're going to get a great deal on. Assuring traceability of parts, making sure it goes back to an OEM or authorized manufacturer. Verification and test methodologies. Do we have ways in place to go test or verify the parts? When we find the counterfeit parts, how do we report it? Many of us will have requirements within our customer contracts on how we go report those. It could be that we have that within our contracts, or we could have, I think here in the United States we have something called GIDEP, where there's GIDEP reports where you can report, here's some counterfeit type parts. And then quarantine and report issues. Once again, we don't want these parts going back to the supplier that sent them to us. We want to treat them like scrap material. (8.2) starts off with customer communication about interacting with the customer. And once again, these are formal customer communications. They're not just if I have an in-house customer, my going and getting coffee with him in the morning. No, it's more about contract type communications, product. The requirement has been added for contingency actions to be considered. 8.2.2, talking about defining and determining what the requirements are related to products or services, and making sure that your organization can meet the claims. That's always kind of been inferred, but now ISO actually calls it out, saying, when you're out there looking at it, don't just nod your head, say, yep, we can do that, yep. If you can't meet the claims, don't sign up for the work. So once we go determine these requirements, then we need to go review the requirements, make sure that it's coordinated with applicable functions of the organization, make sure that we consider the risk associated with it, and if we're not going to meet some of the customer requirements, that we communicate that back to the customer as well. 8.2.4, changes to requirements for products and services. As any changes occur, how are we going to communicate that back to the customer? All right, 8.3, design and development. What you'll notice is a little bit of a different structure. I think the current, or I should say the 2009 version of the standard, it goes planning, inputs, outputs, design reviews, verification, validation, changes. All right, it doesn't exactly fit a process flow. This is a little bit better job where I do my planning up front. What are my inputs? What are the controls to make sure that I'm having a good design and development? And then that yields the output. And then there's changes to that. So a little bit better of a structure. The planning, a little bit more flexibility in determining what the stages and controls are within your design and development. Also require document information to demonstrate compliance to requirements. The inputs now considers obsolescence where applicable. Controls are now the clause that includes design reviews, verification, validation, have all been merged into this design and development controls. Obviously, we want those controls to be done as accurately as possible, so we should use monitoring and measuring devices for those. Outputs should be approved by authorized persons. Once again, that's always kind of been part of the requirement, is that if I have a design signed off engineering, it's done by somebody who's approved to go release that. And then changes, that the changes be controlled, and you notify your customer if there's anything that affects customer requirements. So 8.4, control of externally provided process products and services. This is where we used to talk about purchasing, but hey, oh, by the way, everybody didn't use purchasing for all outsources, so then ISO said, oh, by the way, then you have this overall concept of outsourcing. So what the new standard did is it said anything that you get from the outside that's required for your quality management system goes here in 8.4 and needs to go be compliant. Starts off with general. I will tell you that this is just general controls. How do we go add people to our approved vendor list? And we have included requirements for consideration of direct and sub-tier external providers as well. Many times when we have issues, it's not because the particular supplier had problems, but because their supplier did. So we're making sure that the suppliers are considering, what are the impacts of other sources, other direct and sub-tier external providers. What kind of controls should be taking place with them? The type and extent of controls. If we use test reports as a way of complying to requirements, we need to have a process to confirm those results. We don't want to just be sticking them in a file. We want to make sure that those test reports we have a way of verifying that, yep, that's the product I got. Sometimes I've known of auditors have gone in and, well, look at this, we've gotten the same exact test report for this product for the last, several years. So what we're looking for is, what is it tied to that particular product? How do we know that it's good? Second, when the product we have, the raw material, has a potential significant operational risk, okay? Critical item, for example, we're going to make sure that we validate the test reports for that raw material. So, for example, I have a wing attach fitting that is required to be an aluminum titanium alloy. I want to make sure that it is the correct material, otherwise the material is going to fail, it's going to crack, and the plane's going to go down. Not acceptable. So once again, for your products, the organization is to determine where there's a significant operational risk, and for those activities, look at the raw material to determine whether there's testing that's required to verify those test reports. Information for external providers. There's just more explicit topics to be considered. Before, we called this purchasing information. It was a big old long list. Now what we've done is we've kind of done some groupings to make this a little bit more manageable. So a little bit more on evaluation and test reports. Once again, avoid non-compliance of test reports results with requirements. Determine the products for which the test reports will be required, and at receiving, check the test results to make sure they're compliant before accepting the parts. Validation process of test reports for raw material. Once again, we want to make sure that there's not any risk with regards to using the materials. We've had issues where there have been materials that have been falsified, and resulted in catastrophic type issues. So we don't want those to occur. We want those to be tested. So determining the critical raw materials, which where this applies, define the process. How do I do tests to make sure that they're meeting the requirements, apply the process, and take the necessary actions. Okay. Once again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and record those in the question section. All right, here we go. We got one. How does product safety apply when you have an 8.3 design and development exclusion? One of the things I think that we've done a very good job with is I may be in a machine shop and I might not even know where my part even goes. But I know that I need to go make it according to requirements. But also we've allowed the flexibility within the standard that if it's if it's not applicable, just like kind of critical items are today or key characteristics, you don't have to respond to that particular type of question. So it really has little to do with regard to 8.3, but more along the lines of what's the part and how is it being applied. I could be a machine shop that have taken an 8.3 exclusion. I could get a requirement coming from a customer for a critical item, which indicates that, hey, this is a product safety related item, and here's the additional controls you need to go consider with regard to this. So a lot of it just depends. All right, any other questions? All right, on to 8.5. Production and service provision, pretty much laid out the same way as it was in the 2009. Starts off with control of production and service provision. A little bit more about the control of processes, acceptance criteria. One of the things you'll see is that there's not a separate clause for monitoring and measurement of product. Kind of the in-process piece is, I believe, baked into this 851. There are several sub-clauses under 851. One is the control of equipment, tools, and software programs. 8512, validation and control of special processes. And 8513, production process verification. What ISO did is they got rid of, was it the current 752 special process clause? They boiled it down to just a single line item. I think it's 7518. Let me go verify that. So 851. No. It's actually F, the validation and periodic revalidation of the ability to achieve planned results in the processes for the production and service provision where the resulting output cannot be verified by subsequent monitoring and measurement. So it got moved to a single clause F. We did not think that was adequate, so what we did is we added some of the additional 752 verbiage into 8512. Okay, so that's what's happening there. So 852, identification traceability. 853, property belonging to customers or external providers. 854, preservation. So all those are pretty much unchanged. Post-delivery activities, static, that we no longer need to have a fourth level indention clause for post-delivery activities now that ISO has it. We added our post-delivery activities here in 855. That's also where we have, we structured a little bit differently. Was it in the 2009 version, we have clause 7514B, I believe it is. And because of that, we're talking about where problems are detected after delivery, you should take appropriate actions. It's kind of hard to exclude that, but we didn't want to have it embedded in a list, so that is separated out as its own shall statement now. But because of that, it'll be very hard for organizations to exclude 855 in its entirety. Control of changes, once again, emphasis on beefing up the control of change aspect. 8.6, release of products and services. So this is, what do I go do before I release the product and service to my customer, which is a new clause. And then 8.7, control of non-conforming outputs. And this is where I talked about the fact of maintaining a documented procedure for non-conforming outputs. Really, it's for how do I handle nonconformity and MRB activities as well as corrective action. Section 9, so we talked about the plan, sections 4 through 7, the do, the section 8, now the check. So here's where we're doing our customer satisfaction, our analysis and evaluation. Analysis and evaluation is analysis of data in the past. It's been beefed up some, so the expectations are a little bit more clear, especially with regard to the outputs expected. Also, internal audit. There's now some additional explicit topics to consider, as well as management review. One of the requirements that 9100 added was on-time delivery performance as part of an input. So that's the check. Now the act, the improvement, non-conforming and corrective action, where we have a requirement for human factors during our causal analysis, as well as having, once again, that procedure for non-conformity corrective action. Annexes, some good information in the annexes. The static that ISO has put that in, but once again, it is for guidance. It is not for auditors to go write up nonconformities, but it is guidance to help explain the standard. What we did is we embellished some on the risk to help people try to understand the difference between risk-based thinking and risk management. TC 176 added a full list of standards available, so did IAQG, at least at the time that the standard was published. So a little bit more about human factors. It's really how humans interface with machines and each other and their impact on performance. This whole concept of human factors is really in a couple of different places in the standard. It's where we're talking about it now, where it's an explicit requirement called out for when you're doing your causal analysis to consider human factors. So don't just stop when it says human errors. Yep, I've done my root cause analysis, it was a human error. But why was it a human error? Just saying it was a human error will no longer, well, it should have never been acceptable, but definitely not now. We talked a little bit before, we talked about 714, about the environment for the operation of processes, your work environment, making sure that it's conducive to humans working with a concept. Also, 851G, prevention of human errors. How do we help mistake-proof things such that we don't have human errors in the first place? So determine what human factors to be considered for products, workplaces, equipment, people, Include the elements to be reviewed in your root cause analysis. Capitalize on lessons learned with occurred human errors. So if you said, okay, buddy, that was kind of interesting stuff, but summarize it for me where I can show it to my leadership on one page. Here you go. The black text is 9100. Blue italics is the 91. Black text is ISO 9001. Blue italics is 9100 additional text. Some of the implementation benefits: produce, continually improve safe, reliable products. That's the whole intent. Ensuring customer satisfaction. Meeting customer regulatory requirements. This is something we should be doing day to day. If it's not how we do business day to day, then we haven't properly defined or implemented our quality management system. Improved integration with the business. So it's not something we're doing additional, something that's baked into how we're doing work. The documentation reflects the work performed. We focus on the complete supply chain and all the stakeholders and interested parties. Looking at fewer unique documents coming from customers, as well as this being recognized by our regulatory authorities. So where are we at? Obviously, ISO was released back in September of last year. 9100 was published in September of this year. October of 2016, 9101, 9110, 9120 were all published in all three sectors. At the end of this month, the mandatory aerospace auditor transition training will be available in all 9 IAQG languages. The OASIS Next Gen. Many of you are familiar with OASIS. As part of the rollout, there will be a new the next generation of OASIS will be coming out. This is significant. The reason why I say that is because OASIS Next Gen will have the auditors be typing directly into OASIS. You'll be typing your corrective actions, if any, into OASIS. You'll be approving your reports in OASIS. So it will include a lot more hands-on activity with OASIS. June 2017, all future audits will be done to the new 2016 standard using the new 9101 2016 audit process. The reason for that is so we can have our transition be complete by September 2018. The significance of that is we don't want your organization to have to transition twice, once to ISO and then once again to 9100 series. Would rather happen all together. That's why we're following this ambitious timelines. Deployment support material, where to find it. So if you go to the iaqg.org website, here under deployment support materials on the left-hand side, there's also a yellow box on the top right. You can click either of them and it'll take you to the screen on the right. You can click 9100 and it'll take you to this screen, which includes a lot of different information. We also include links to ISO 9001 2015 guidance material that TC 176 has provided to us. Okay? So let's see. We have quite a bit of time left for any questions. Do we have any questions? I should have got some Jeopardy music or something playing in the background. Well, I hope that you found this webinar interesting, informative. Once again, I know that Perry Johnson is audio taping this, so if you want to go back and listen to it again, that's great. Share it with friends and family. The holidays are coming up. What the heck? Please do. Thank you. A question. Oh, I'm sorry. Could you resend that last question? Thanks. I got the very informative from Melissa. Thank you very much. But the one before that, I clicked a little too far to the left and clicked the delete. If you could resend that to me, I would certainly appreciate it. Ah, yes. Does this mean we have to be compliant to the AS9100 2016 by June 2017? Yes, it does. So thank you for that, Rebecca. Which I know, that's one of the, once again, in order to avoid dual transitions, we have this very aggressive deadline, so I apologize for that. Okay, any other questions? All right, well, this is Buddy Crescione then. Oh, here we go. If we have our AS9100 audit in February, will we be audited to the new standard? It depends when your next surveillance audit is going to be. The transition to the new audit can be either during a surveillance audit or a recertification audit, doesn't matter. Any audit after July of 2017 will be to the new standard. So you said your last audit was in February. If your next audit is in February 2017, you get to have a choice. Do you want to be to the 2009 version or to the 2016 version? Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions? All right. Well, hopefully you found this webinar beneficial, and I wish you success in your transition. You all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.